Let's motor on then and tackle the first discussion topic of episode 13, as voted for by you. Fans Pulse Lap 1. Incidentally, just a reminder that every Sunday night on our Facebook, Facebook account, we always post 6 discussion topics, 6 candidate topics, and we invite you to vote over the course of 2 or 3 days on up to 4 of those topics that you would like us to feature in that week's episode. So if you haven't done so in the past, it literally takes 20 seconds. Click on the link, cast your votes, lock them in, job done, and we pick up your voting, and that determines which 3 or 4 discussion topics that we talk about. All right, let's move on then with first discussion topic tonight. Fans Pulse Lap 1, the cost of borrowing a bike, by which we really mean from a rider perspective, from a team perspective. What are the implications and the practicalities of riders having to share bikes during the meeting? So gents, one thing, I guess it's an observation, it's an assertion, perhaps rightly or wrongly, by myself. Is it probable these days with riders having 2 or 3 bikes at least? Is it likely these days that riders don't have to borrow bikes quite as much as they did back in the day? Nigel, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's so much about just because riders have got 2 or 3 bikes as well, but, you know, when a bike breaks down, when you're going around to tapes, it's a matter of getting one out as quick as you can. And I don't know what it's like so much nowadays, but certainly in my day, if your bike broke down last second or 2, you know, your teammates would bring one out. There was never a thing about cost of borrowing or anything like that. We never even talked about. I mean, I rode Eric Monahan's bike many a time. He rode mine, and other lads did as well. You did it for your team, really. It was nothing to do with cost or anything. It was just to try and benefit the team, and hopefully we could win. That was what it all about. I mean, when I was riding for Sheffield, I know I went out one night, and as I'm going to tapes, my bike stopped. Sean Moran fetched his Gordon out. What an animal that was. I couldn't ride that at all. But no thoughts about it. Sean straight out with his bike, and I rode his bike, not a thought about crashing it and blowing engines, anything like that, just for the good of the team. And that was Sean Moran.
Very good.
I don't know if it's still the same nowadays. I don't know. The other 2 lads will know more about it, I think, than me.
Robbo, to the uninitiated Speedway fan, a Speedway bike's a Speedway bike. Physically, it looks the same. It is the same in many respects in terms of the rules and regs around the component parts of a Speedway bike. But practically speaking, from a rider's perspective, if as Nigel's just described, at extremely short notice, you had to jump on a teammate's bike, try and help us understand how different that might be from the one that you're accustomed to.
Well, with me especially, I was quite high, and my handlebars would be quite high. Then you get someone like Ben, was a good example. He would have his bars quite low, and I'm sure I rode Ben's bike at some point because I was teammates with him at Coventry for a while. And I'm sure I must have rode his bike at some point. And the difference is just unbelievable. Like the position on it makes your body position in a completely different to what you're used to. What you set your bike up to have it at. So it affects everything. It affects you off the start. It affects you coming into the corners, in the middle of the corners, off the corners. I mean, only going down the straight is the sort of bit that you can get away with. But it makes a massive difference. It's huge. And now and again, I could get on someone's bike. I rode quite a lot of different bikes over the years. My brother's I could get on, even though he had his handlebars quite low. I'm sure I rode like Danny King's bike at some point. And I remember borrowing Billy Janero's bike, and he rode antique frames. And it was pulling my arms out this thing. And I remember I actually crashed it at Coventry, and I ended up being quite injured. I don't know if I punctured my lung or something, and I had quite a bad injury from it, and smashed the bike and wrote the bike off. And I mean, he just said, "Don't worry about it." But normally you would fix that. He said, "Don't worry, it's fine." But that was just that kind of person Billy Janero was. He didn't care. He sorted it himself, and that was that. But yeah, the difference is massive.
It's interesting, Carol. As just to build on what Stuart's just described, I suppose your own bike customised for your shape and build and all that, and size and all that good stuff. It must be like an armchair. It must be like sitting in an armchair, right? You're comfortable with it. You know how it operates, how it feels, all that good stuff. So to jump on someone else's bike, and as Stuart says, the saddle might be higher, lower, further back, whatever it might be. The handlebar position might be contrary to what you're accustomed to. It must be super uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is, and it's like I'm not the tallest of people, so I always rode like, obviously Stuart, he had a high seat, mine was quite low. So to jump on, you go from, I've rode Ulrich's bike, so to go from like mine to Ulrich's was completely different. It's like, and it almost like sits you upright because it's so tall. So like Stuart said, your riding style completely changes. Because of the positioning on the bike, which is, if you're jumping on a bike at the start of a race and then you've got to do 4 laps on it on a bike that you don't know, it's so hard to get used to that bike so quickly. And it's like even when I had 2 bikes, to try and set them up so they were both identical was so difficult, even though you buy the same seat, you buy the same seat brackets, the same frames. And it's like, you got on one and it was like, well, this feels completely different to that one, even though everything should be identical. But for some reason it wasn't, and I always found I had one bike that worked really well for me on smaller tracks and one bike that worked really well at Peterborough. So it was like, that was my bike for the smaller tracks. This was my Peterborough bike, even though they were supposed to be identical. But yeah, going from, different heights, if you got, Crabby saying about Eric Monaghan. Eric Monaghan was, what was he, 5 foot and a fag paper, and to somebody to jump on Eric's bike, who's 6 foot tall, would find it very awkward. Where would you put your legs for? But that's how it is, and I always found it was quite difficult. And it's, when the riders used to bring a bike out, it was like, who's bringing one out? Because you don't want somebody who's really tall, but then you don't want somebody who's really short.
Yeah.
But Ben was one that he was first one out there. Whoever's bike it was packed up, Ben was already out the pit gate riding around the track to dump his off. He's that sort of, a bit taller than me, but he's sort of that medium sort of height that probably suited everybody. But yeah, very difficult, really difficult. And I always found there was riders that didn't want to give their bikes up to anyone else. They'd go, well, who's broken down? Well, it's Ben Barker. No, ours is still cold. It's like, but you get that. It's, they knew that if Ben's going to jump on their bike, he's gonna push it with an inch of its life. Yeah. So, but yeah, I always found that the team sort of gelled, and whoever got the bike out there first, it was always pretty good. But we was quite fortunate that we had a sponsor that would sponsor any damage for any bikes.
Okay. Yeah.
That was given to somebody else. So if their bike broke down,
right,
if they damaged it, they would sponsor the repair bill, because ultimately it's not the rider who's lent the bike's fault, and most of the time it's probably not the rider who's got it. It's so they did used to cover the cost, which was for me really good, because then you got riders that would agree to give you a bike even if they didn't fancy it.
I hadn't heard of that type of sponsorship before. That was really invaluable, I would imagine, Carol. Nigel, just going back to what you were talking about earlier on, you gave that example of Sean Moran coming out with his Gordon. When you're in that situation, right, and you had to borrow at short notice someone else's machinery, right? I guess either you could ride it or you couldn't, or it pulled your arms out, or it, like Stuart described, or it didn't. But did that ever lead to rider envy, Nigel, where suddenly you believe that you needed to have a Gordon, or you need to have a Stuart frame, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, that always happens, I think. And I think Stuart and Carl agree with this one. You go on somebody else's bike, and if you make a sound, you get used to it fairly quick. If you're in front, you get used to it fairly quick. and all of a sudden you think, bloody hell, this engine feels so much better than mine. It probably isn't at all, but they can feel good, and if you're not careful, it'll mess with your head and you'll lose your way a little bit. But as I say, I remember using Graham Jones's one night at Stoke in Graham's early days at Stoke, and he was a big tall lad. But my feet would hardly touch the floor, and he put stabilisers on it, like. But you just used it, didn't you? If somebody brought you a bike out, you used it. And I can remember many times using Eric's bike, and it didn't feel like mine. But if you made a start on it, you soon got used to it, and you had to, didn't you? At front end, when you've got 3 others up your backside, like, wanting to pass you. So you still get used to it, and when you think 3 points, well, I'm better having that 3 points worth of money than them. So you still get used to it.
Fascinating. Carol Johnson, are the days of track spares long gone? Because back in the day, that was a thing. I don't know if every track had a track spare, but the concept was that, if riders had mechanical issues, that they would wheel out a club-owned machine that riders would use. Is that long gone these days, Carol?
Yeah, I'm still talking about bikes, I take it.
But bikes, yeah. Bikes, yes.
I was thinking as well.
I can see Stuart's brain clicking over. I think that's long gone. It's so difficult to set bikes up for every rider. They're all different. They're like Stewie said. Like if you get on Bomber's bike, his handlebars are like on the floor. Whereas you jump on Simon on Lambert's bike and the seat's up in the air that high. But he's a tall lad. So to get that. To get that balance, it's so difficult. Now, what we did have was club engines. So if somebody blew an engine up, they'd borrow an engine, which is slightly different. You just put it in your bike. But as the bikes now, and obviously nowadays you're only allowed so many bikes in the pits anyway. So you have some try and get away with extra back wheels. But they sort of get found out. To have a spare bike there is it's difficult now.
It's interesting. You mentioned Bomber there, and the way that he sets his handlebars and things, which I've heard some riders who have borrowed equipment from Bomber commenting on. But Ronnie Corey, Ronnie, good evening to you, Ronnie, if you're watching. Ronnie will be back on 360 Speedway incidentally at some point. But I remember Ronnie saying that a few episodes ago that he used to shorten his handlebars, I'm sure is what he said, and that allowed him to kind of nip through little gaps that otherwise he couldn't have managed to do.
Yeah, us shorter people had to do them sort of things because we could never reach the outside the handlebars. So I used to cut about probably 1.5 centimetres off each side for mine. Whereas Stuart's a bit taller, so his wingspan's a lot wider. He probably wanted an extra centimetre on. Rather than take it off. But yeah, I used to cut mine down. I have seen people cut them unequal.
Unequal?
You cut them unequal, so their throttle hand was slightly longer than their clutch hand. Because obviously the way you turn the bike, their style naturally brought the twist grip into their body, so it was higher up. Their elbow was higher. So they used to cut them uneven, which I found really sort of strange, but it worked for them, I suppose.
Interesting. Nigel, were you going to share a story there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like Carl says, I used to cut a bit off each end of my bars because, I'm not very tall, I'm a light. So, I used to cut a bit off each end, maybe 1/2 inch or something. I can't remember what I did.
I bet you even sold the metal for scrap, Nigel, didn't you? Bet you did.
Well, probably sold it in, but no, you're talking about the track spares and everything when tracks used to have them. I think you're going back plenty years when bikes were pretty basic and pretty standard, weren't they? The engines were, I don't say they're all the same, but the frames were all the same. They were Jawa frames. I think that's in the days when they had the track spares, isn't it? When everything was pretty standard. You didn't have all the fancy gear on them like there is nowadays. Like that's that was when they had the track spares, I think.
Excellent. Well, there you are, 360 speeders. Who knew there were so many considerations and impracticalities around sharing speedway bikes? To the untrained eye, they do look identical, but clearly, given what the guys have been telling us, that they're very, very much different and very much customised to the pilot. So next time you happen to be wandering through a pits lane in a speedway track, then have a look at the handlebars and see if they look remotely the same size on either side. Episode 13. Some of your messages received over the past 7 days or so. Thank you very much to all of you who take time and the trouble, quite frankly, to submit some thoughts, some questions, or just empty your head of whatever might be rattling around in there. So, okay, let's dive in. First up this week, Duncan R. From Rotherham. Duncan, I think you are a regular contributor. Thank you very much, Duncan. Much appreciated. About British riders getting priority. We used to have that in the National League days years ago. Ryhouse took legal action to allow a European rider to ride for them. That was the start of the end. I think you're referring, Duncan, if I remember correctly, late 80s, 87, 88, thereabouts. Ryhouse did take some legal action, and a ruling allowed Jens Rasmussen, I think was the rider's name, if I remember correctly, a Danish rider who became the first foreign rider, non-British rider, to ride in the then National League. And to your point, you say the start of the end, Duncan. Since then, there has been obviously a conveyor belt of foreign riders into not only the top flight in Britain, but also the second division. I've enjoyed that over the years. If you think of all the great rider talent that we could have missed out on, but as we've been talking about in recent weeks, potentially this might be a time for British Speedway to take stock of its direction of travel and its team building strategy, and maybe to protect and develop some British riders. So thank you, Duncan. Cumbrian Ken has been back in touch. Hello, Cumbrian Ken. Brilliant news that Workington's suspension has been lifted. Yes, that is the best news all Speedway fans in the UK have heard in quite a few weeks. Thank you to those involved. Can't wait to get them bikes on track and beat them pirates. So yeah, the delightful news broke this week that Workington, in conjunction with the British Speedway promoters or British Speedway Promoters Limited, have resolved the administration issues, and there was some legalities involved, to the best of my understanding. Glasgow appeared to have played a part in helping to resolve the issue for Workington. But the key news, the key message is that the Comets are back on track, and I'm sure, as you are, Cumbrian Ken, thoroughly looking forward after a too long a break to getting back on track down in Workington this Saturday in the splendid sunshine against the defending league champions. The Pool Pirates are in town. Good luck to the Comets. I hope there's a big turnout on Saturday to welcome the team back on track. Gen X. I always get my gens mixed up. Gen X might be my sort of age group. From Hale's Owen, submitted via email. Gen X writes, surely there must be someone looking to secure a new start venue for Speedway. Perhaps multi-purpose like the Wheels in the West Midlands would be supported. So I reference Gen X to the fact, sadly, that with the loss of Wolverhampton, Birmingham, Coventry, etc., Cradley more historically, there is going to be a dearth of Speedway certainly in the West Midlands. Leicester's not so far off, of course, but a number of clubs, well-established clubs, who have been lost currently to the sport. And to your point, I think back in the 80s, if I remember correctly, there was a Wheels. I can't remember the full term, but there was a bit of a multi-purpose sports venture in Birmingham, which the Brummies were part of at a different venue. So maybe something of that ilk might allow at least one West Midlands club to be resurrected, and maybe it could be a shared venue. Who knows? That would be interesting. But collectively across the West Midlands Speedway going fraternity, I'm sure, to your point, Gen X, there would be good support for such an initiative. Jeff E from Rugby. can we have some discussion on creating one big league for 2026? It surely must now happen. It's more obvious than ever before. Well, Jeff, if the jungle drums are to be believed, if the rumour mill is remotely correct, then as we've alluded to once or twice already in recent weeks, British Speedway is in for another pivotal winter with the Speedway promotions and the BSPL masterminding, I guess, a way forward into 2026 and beyond. It's going to be interesting. The one thing that I'm going to say, Jeff, you're not the only 360 Speedster 360 viewer who has made a similar comment, and absolutely 360 Speedway will be across this. I envisage we're going to spend lots of talk time, lots of discussion time. We're going to invite lots of comments, but we're probably going to dedicate one or two podcasts in their entirety to exactly what might happen next year. Right here, right now, I'd much sooner focus on the current season. When you turn up the focus on, current league playthings and team forms and all that good stuff. But absolutely, we will not. We will give due care and attention and focus to the events that we know are going to come at us before too many more months. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks to everyone who's taken time to message. You too can have your message read out. Just empty your head. Anything you want to say, short and sweet, or a little bit longer, and we can abbreviate it suitably. And it would be great to hear from you and share your thoughts.